Most producers think finishing a track needs to be some painful, drawn-out process full of complex mixing and saving 17 different versions. But it's taken me 20 years of releasing records to figure out that the final stage of calling a track done can be quick, smooth, and actually enjoyable. And today I'm going to prove it by walking you through a track I recently completed so you can follow my decision making and apply the tactics to your own finishing workflow. And at the end I'll show you my secret trick to make any mix super loud, and I promise it's not what you expect. So this is my track. It's called Pure Science. It's a halftime track with this animated mid-range bass running through it. Pure Science. This is where I left it after the first session. I tried to write the bulk of a track in one single block of time while inspiration is flowing and I'm in the zone and the idea is fresh. So at this stage I knew the track was 90 to 95% done. It was really close to crossing the finish line. When producers get to this stage, they think it's time for a final mix in a pure technical sense. But I actually think it's something much more straightforward. At this point, I only have two goals. Number one is very simple. As you've probably experienced, it's all too easy to mess up a good track and undo all your hard work by losing perspective and going crazy with mixing and all sorts of wild decisions. So goal number one is simply to not f it up. Don't do unnecessary stuff just for the sake of it. Every move needs to be considered and have purpose. Then goal number two is why I don't think of this last stage as pure mixing. It can be mixing, but it can also be anything else, because my second goal is also simple: do the absolute minimum I need to do to make the track what it needs to be. But how do you know what the track needs to be to call it finished? Well, I do this by referencing. So in this project I use two reference tracks. One is a Skrillex track, which I'm not going to play due to copyright, and the other reference track is one of my own tracks called Devices. Using pro reference tracks is great, but it also helps to use one of your own mastered tracks because you already reached that standard at least once before. Notice that I've routed the reference tracks outputs straight to the master output, so they're not running through my master bus because they're already mastered and we don't want to master them twice. Also, you can see I've turned both reference tracks down by 1 decibel because they're a tiny bit too loud, and level matching really matters when you're referencing. Something else I've done here is import the bounce of my previous version 1 into the project alongside the references. Back to my first goal of not wanting to things up, I can always check back to my starting point and make sure we're advancing, not messing things up. Okay, so once I'd set up my reference tracks, I A/B'd between my project and the references. And then back to the second goal, I asked myself, what is the minimum I need to do to make the track what it needs to be? To me, my track felt a little bit further away, a little less up front. And here's why. Lows and highs are important, but there's a famous saying, the magic's in the mid-range. I needed a tiny bit more mid-range push to get my track to sit more correctly. And then from then on, everything I did was in service of that one goal. So because the mids were the focus, I zoomed in on my most important mid-range element, which is the modulated bass layer. I designed this by processing a copy of the 808 sub. I actually covered this in a Cable Guys video. I'll link that below if you're interested in how I made this bass. For the mid bass, I wanted to achieve two things. I wanted to turn up its level, and I also wanted to saturate it slightly just to sit it forward in the mids. To do that, I used this saturation knob, and I turned up the amount without any re-leveling after. So I've added level and a bit of crunch in one move. When I turn this plugin off, you can hear the mid bass gets a bit more saturated and sits forward nicely. Two birds with one stone. Now, sometimes when you do one thing, it can create a problem or a side effect in another area. Here, later in the track, this drive made this automated section sound too loud and harsh. So to fix this, I automated the drive amount down to come down just on that section. Alright, so the mid bass was pushed forward nicely, but then I noticed something about the kick and sub. When I solo them, you can hear some distortion and weirdness. So here I trimmed off some length from the kick to let the sub bass take up the space in the lows. But back to the mid balance, I also noticed that the kick wasn't quite cutting through as much as the references, like it was lacking in confidence. So first I layered this knocky mid-range sample over the kick. And then I used a tiny bit of transient shaping to help the kick's attack poke through a bit more. So listen to the kick in the mix as I play the before and after. Once I got the mid bass and the kick sitting right, the other important mid element is the clap, and that felt a tad too thin, like it needed some meat. So I boosted this band of EQ around 500 Hz. And back to killing two birds with one stone, to make the clap less spiky and push it a little louder, I boosted the input into clipping to shave off some of its peak and also push it forward in the mix. So you can see how, because of my initial referencing diagnosis, I then tweaked these three elements to give them a bit more push, a bit more crunch and more presence in the mids. Here's the difference before and after. However, back to side effects, everything is relative. By bringing the mid bass and the kick and the clap up, I'd effectively pushed other mid sounds back. The vocal and other synths now sounded weedy and placid. So from here I used some little bits of OTT and saturation to get those sounds to stand up straight and demand a bit more attention. So at this point, the sonics were feeling great, but this exposed some holes in the composition. Like I said, I'm not only doing a final mix, I'm doing what needs to be done to get this sounding and feeling as it should. This means that for me, all the different roles can blur together. I'm not a mixing engineer, I'm finishing my track however it needs to be finished. And because the other sections were now pumped up a bit, I noticed that this cool down section needed some subtle candy to keep your ear interested. So I automated this glitchy modem layer to fade in and out at certain points. And I also introduced this clicky percussion layer. And then I also added this subtle mid-bass fill element. Alright, so now the track was done. It was time for the magic. Let me show you my super secret mixing trick for getting a loud mix every time. So on my master channel, I'm using a highly complex mastering plugin. Its utility, a basic gain tool turned up just 5 decibels, clipping the master into the red. And my LUFS are hitting about -5.5. So this is the special loudness trick. I hope you're ready for it. You've already seen it throughout the rest of the video. My track naturally ended up loud without me even trying, not because I used some fancy multi-band mastering plugin, but because I got the balance right. I balanced the mids to sit correctly in the track. Reference, get the balance right with good sounds sitting in the right place, and the track goes loud on its own. And to be clear, I don't actually care about loudness at all, at least not in the way most producers do when they obsess over clipping every sound or watching the LUFS meter. All I care about is those two rules, not f***ing up the track I already made and liked, and doing the minimum to get it sounding as it should compared to the references. Because I know that I can turn off this utility, export a pre-master, and my mastering engineer will do an even better job of making the track sound clear and correct and loud enough for release. And a quick note on why I use utility clipping on the master and not a mastering limiter while I'm working. A pro limiter is too clever. It's trying to be adaptive, it's trying to help you, and this can disguise what's going on in the mix. Clipping is blunt and crude, so for me it highlights mix problems like a magnifying glass instead of smoothing them over. And once the track is done, right at the end, I might try swapping utility for a fancier limiter for a slightly cleaner, clearer sound. So in this video, I doubt I've blown your mind with any unexpected tricks or techniques. Everything I've done is idiotically simple, and that is the whole point. I'm not the best mix engineer in the world. I'm not trying to be. I'm getting a track finished doing the simplest thing that works so I can call it done and move on. But here's the most important thing. I got to the finish line because I used a framework that me and many other producers are using to finish better tunes more consistently. So if you're sick of being stuck in a loop and you want my simple finishing system, head to loop2track.com or click the link below. And I've been making music for a few years now, 20 of them in fact, but I've made a ton of mistakes along the way. So to help you avoid those mistakes, go and watch this video right here.